really is it.
That's really it. Yeah, and they make it last for like a month before Lent.
Well, that's, you know, nice thing about the Catholics and the Episcopals. I always say they can sin without guilt. You know, they kind of do the
Something like
part.
that. Yeah, something like that.
Just get somebody to bless it, it's okay.
So I wore Mardi Gras
Mardi
today.
Gras colors.
Yes, and because we're also doing composer reports, I felt like I had a double duty, right? But this is what you'd wear like to a parade or something. The millions of parades you go to, all month long. And all the roads are always shut down, so you never get where you want to go because the roads are shut for the parades. Wow. We would get stranded at church on Sunday. One Sunday out of every carnival season, we could not get home because there was a parade between church and our house.
Really?
Yeah, we'd get to church and then we'd find a parking lot and take a nap in the car until the parade was done, so we could get home. Wow, it was crazy.
Well, I can tell you,
New Orleans leave for Mardi Gras. They don't say.
I can see why.
It's a mess.
I can see why.
I'm in Texas.
So, okay, did we watching the Olympics? Yes. No. What's wrong with you? You un-American? What are you? What? What now? Doing homework.
That's right.
Dutiful students. Such good students. That is so. Well, I was glad the Ruskies got beat. They needed to get beat. In Paris figure skating. Ruskies. Instead of communists, they all shoot a lot of them. But I mean, you know, they're giving guys points that they're giving. I mean, there's this one couple that botched it not once but like 2 or 3 times, and they end up getting this enormous score that put them near the top. Now, you guys don't remember this. Mr. Mueller remembers this back in the day when the communists were in charge over there. And I mean, you couldn't count on getting a fair competition because the Ruskies, they'd either threaten people or do whatever, but it was always a cheat. Don't trust them.
Women?
No,
What are we talking about?
I didn't say that. I was talking about the Ruskies, the Russians, you know, the communists. And then and they have the audacity to call themselves the Republic of Soviet states. And then the stinking Chinese are just as bad. Although I kind of like them. I had this couple that was in Paris figure skating. I thought you were studying. You said that. More what? You said that. My wife's watching. I'm watching it with her.
It's just as bad.
Oh
boy.
You know, and so, and there's this couple that's been skating for 18 years. They're married to each other. They've been skating for 18 years, so they finally win the gold, which was okay. They kind of abused the word republic. It's kind of nice.
They say the Republic of China.
Well,
Yeah, the
they're
People's
pretty,
Republic of China. Something
they're
wrong with
pretty
that.
similar to Plato's Republic. And think about it now.
Well, his is just a bad translation of Greek. Theirs is the effort to manipulate, deceive, and lie to you. It's exactly what they're doing. So, anyway, well, I didn't know you guys are such non-Olympic types. I would have thought so.
I love
we have school.
I've been watching.
I love them.
Oh, have you?
I was working so hard on Worldview. Yeah,
So
actually,
you're
that's
doing
true. Really.
I've had trouble watching most of it because of all my Worldview.
Maybe in 4 years. Yeah. Maybe next next 4 years.
Yeah, maybe in 2 years.
Maybe when I'm 80 years old.
Baby?
2050.
2015.
That's weird. Well, that's really weird that we're actually seeing that.
It's like landing around.
Yeah. Landing on the moon correctly.
10 points.
That'd be so funny. Figure skating on the moon.
And he does the 25.
Okay.
No gravity. Really helpful.
Let's finish our music reports. Those what things? What you call it? Awesome. That's a better word. That's a better word. Good. Those of you who've got the pain over with, do you need to get with does groups 3 and 4 need to converge? Y'all good?
Yeah.
Aye. You're not going to converge, you just need to be ready. Okay? Caroline, I expect you to be an honest girl and sit there live. For what?
That's cheap. It's like cheating.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started here anyway. You're good. You're good. You're good. Okay. Anything monumental? We all good? Nah. Shay, you have the audacity to bring all your goodies in? Share them? I don't want that stuff. Y'all get proud of me. I'm eating right. More or less. More or less. I did have hot dogs last night. There's nothing healthy about hot dogs. I mean, the healthiest hot dog is unhealthy.
Unless it's a kosher hot dog.
Just good.
Actually,
Well, you know, we don't do it just a little bit. In my place, you have to have chilies, cheese, onions, you have to have everything. Yeah, it's in the meat of the chili. Nutritional value, onions have nutritional value. We have wheat buns.
That's my mom is my I would not shoot turkey hot dogs.
What's that?
Turkey hot dogs.
You know, my wife probably tried hot dogs last night, I just didn't know.
No, you would know it's their wife.
Oh, that's right.
Are they nasty?
Yeah, like
Had one.
I would not eat that.
She had, I'll tell you what she had in one back is turkey sausage. And hey, boys, I'm right there with you on most of that turkey, trying to make turkeys into stuff.
We have a freezer full of medicine, so we're covered.
Oh, see, that's good stuff. Did you kill it? Really?
So my dad and
I saw your sister too. We should go out.
Well, one time I went out this year, I didn't see it.
Great.
Okay. Tired of this foolishness. Trying to what?
like that's gonna happen.
What a novel idea. Shay sit still and be quiet. That is a novel.
It's a little quiet.
Okay. We are next with all right, I need group 3. I need books chapter 17. Who's doing chapter 17? Come on, Catherine. Come on out, Catherine. All right, starting early in the morning.
Who do you have?
I have Giuseppe Verdi.
Verdi.
Yes. Verdi, he was born in Italy in Leroncourt, which was a small village in the province of Parma. His father owned a small inn, but they were all peasants, but they were all happy. Verdi received the rudiments of his musical education from the village organist. At age 16, he was already writing songs, piano pieces, church music, and marches. At age 18, he went to go study at the conservatory, but they rejected him, saying he was too old to begin and he had no money. But he overcame all the negative comments and ideas, and he then became the private student of Vincenzo who taught him harmony and counterpoint and everything he knew about opera. After 3 years in Milan, he returned to Busseto and married Margherita Barzai in 1835. His family moved to Milan in 1839 with his 2 children due to the fact that several of his operas were failing. In November 1839, he produced Roberto, which led to a commission. And when he began to write a comic opera called King for a Day, but he got sick, and when he finally recovered, but then between 1838 and 1840, his wife and both children died.
Of what?
It didn't say, just said that they died.
Died of death.
Wait, how did you do
Died of death.
Actually, he's trying to see what's
Yes.
and his skull cracked. His eyes
His
seem
opera
turning.
King of the Dead. Are you done? Okay, his opera King of the Dead was produced in 1840, but it was a complete fiasco, and he never wanted to compose again because of that. But his friend had put tobacco, which is made from tobacco, to music in 3 months, and was the foundation of his fame and fortune. And it was about not tobacco, but Nebuchadnezzar, sorry. And then Giuseppe Strapponi, who was an opera singer, became Verdi's second devoted wife. And his early operas were influenced by Rossini, Bellini. He also put Macbeth from Shakespeare to music. And his 3 best operas were Rigoletto, Il Trovatore, and La Traviata. He loved nature. He loved going on walks. He loved farming. That was his other passion aside from music and writing. Him and his second wife, they were always going to Milan, Rome, Venice, Paris, and other European cities, so they were never in one place very long. In total, he wrote 26 operas, and his wife died, his second wife died in 1897, and then Verdi died in 1901 of a stroke in Milan. So, yeah.
Anything about Verdi?
His opera. The Requiem, I was just reading here that there were a bunch of the composers at that time that were writing Requiems or masses, and for some reason the Pope decided that they were inappropriate, and so these guys were all kind of offended that here they'd written these incredible works, they were beautiful, and they didn't think that they were inappropriately written themselves, but the Pope kind of blacklisted them. So. But mainly opera. Verdi is Mr. Opera.
Hard on women.
children. Yeah, kind of wore them out or
Went
something.
through 2 of them, good gracious. Okay, good deal. Okay, number, what's next, 18?
Brahms.
All right, who's that?
I have 19, which is wrong.
Okay, I don't think we're doing 18.
Yes, I have Brahms written down.
Okay, Brahms is the next one, that's 19.
Yes.
Dalton, there's a reason you're sitting over there by yourself.
I wasn't listening. There is a reason for that. Are you done? Okay. That's what I begin now.
Okay. Johannes Brahms. This man was a man, and he was born in Hamburg, Germany, and he grew up there in a very poor family. His parents, his dad was a bass cellist for an orchestra, and his mom was actually like 17 years older than his dad. It's kind of awkward, kind of weird. And so, growing up,
17 years old,
Yeah.
Dad.
yeah,
That's a little awkward.
that is a lot. It's like, where's the drink was coming from? So, yeah, he grew up as a pianist, and he performed as a little boy to get extra money for the family. He had 2 teachers, one by the name of Friedrich Kassel and Eduard Markson. He was an excellent pianist, and so therefore he played a lot, performed. He was kind-hearted and polite, no haughtiness.
So he was ugly, right?
Right, exactly. I'm glad you understood me. So, he began playing at the age of 10 piano, but he, at the end of his life, he accepted Christ, and then eventually started writing songs about Jesus Christ. And he was actually pretty close to Robert Schumann and his family, and when Robert Schumann died, he secretly loved his wife for a long time, which is just gonna need some help. So and so he loved her but never married her. So he wrote and when he would write songs, he would send it to her, which is kind of funny. She's like, yeah. So he wrote songs for pianos, regular orchestral songs, and violins, and I would highly recommend listening to some of these songs, like the Concerto D and for violin,
John?
So Johannes Brahms eventually died in 1897 and lived a great life full of music and awkward lovers. Thank you.
What was he most noted for, John?
In what?
In music. What was his biggest, what was his contribution?
I think probably just his pianos. Actually, you know what, I forgot to say one thing, that he actually transposed a song in his head before he played it and knew it by memory and transposed it into different keys. So, what were you looking for?
I feel like somebody like that deserved a little more treatment than that, but, okay.
Brahms was part of the Romantic movement, and I was just reading that they divided the Romantic movement into 2 parts, the conservative and kind of on the edge kind of people, and so Wagner was one of those kind of more progressive, crazier kind of people, whereas Brahms was part of the conservative school. I think of Brahms as just a huge, beautiful, large orchestra kind of sound. He wrote a Requiem that I want somebody to put a choir and orchestra together to do at my funeral, because it is fabulous, fabulous music. Great, he uses scripture, and Brahms has got just a wonderful sound, really rich, beautiful sound to it.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. 21. You, Kevin. If you're a homeschooler, you know this guy. At least you should. He's homeschool mamas. Huh?
See, I've got Peter, Illich, and help me with this last name, Shervosky?
Tchaikovsky.
I butchered it.
Now you know, right?
Personally, I rather call him Pete, so. He was born in 1840, he died in 1893, so he's kind of one of the Romantic movement composers. He was interesting in the sense that he didn't really have any musical background. You know, a lot of the composers we're talking about, they got to know music in one or two ways. Basically, they either were learning it from the church, they were participating in, they were like a choir boy or something like that, or they had a musical family. Tchaikovsky was unique in the sense he didn't really have that background. In fact, he was moving toward a career in law until one day he saw an opera, which was Mozart's Don Giovanni. Now, why Italian opera is so inspirational, I'm not sure, but after hearing this opera, he was so inspired he decided to pursue a career in music. So, what he did was he went to the St. Petersburg Conservatory and he studied under Anton Rubinstein. I'm not sure who exactly that is, but I'm pretty sure he's Russian too, so that there. It's interesting that Tchaikovsky's lifestyle, although he wrote great music, he wasn't exactly a role model. I'm not sure how to put this delicately, but this guy had multiple boyfriends, so you don't want to model your life after him. Like many composers, he was very melancholy. He struggled with bouts of depression, anxiety. He had migraines, so you don't want to be as healthy as he was. It's not a compliment to be as healthy as he is. So his impression of life was basically that it was some kind of battle against fate. So although he was a romantic, he kind of had elements of existentialism in his belief. Basically, he took the conclusion of naturalism that there is really no point to life. And he had to find some purpose, so his purpose was finding the struggle against fate. So he kind of had struggles there. And accordingly, a lot of his music was composed kind of on this grand theme of some kind of struggle against fate. He's very well known, a lot of his pieces are well known. He wrote the Nutcracker Suite, the Overture of 1812, and the Romeo and Juliet Overture. So really famous works, everybody knows pretty much all of them. So when I listen to them, I'm kind of impressed with how dramatic they are, especially, you know, like the Nutcracker Suite, it's like children's ballet, but it's kind of like very, very dramatic, even for a ballet performance. So I was kind of impressed with that, and it kind of reflects his view of music and his view of life, that we're really in a struggle against fate as opposed to some other reason to compose music. So his worldview kind of reflected in his music. So that's about all I've got for him. So.
Okay. Well, he did try to pursue, married a woman, but it ended up being disastrous. So what do you think with people?
Like 6 months or something.
Yeah, it didn't last long. She wasn't exactly a nice person herself.
You're the one.
I got a sandwich between me and all the girls.
Yeah. Okay, obviously wrote some very strong stuff too.
I would probably, short and sweet, connect Tchaikovsky with ballet, because besides the Nutcracker Suite, he also wrote Swan Lake. Okay, that was another significant piece that he wrote. So, and he did symphonic poem, he did violin concerto, all that general stuff, but he's best known for his ballet.
Okay.
And again, remember, this was the entertainment of the time. There was no television. Okay? And so, that's what people did for entertainment. That's why it was so popular to write opera, to write ballet, because it was something visual and musical. They could go out and have some entertainment if you could afford it.
That's hard for us to get a hold of.
Yeah, yeah. We
Today.
Just, yeah.
I mean, I don't know what most of you guys would do without your little things. Little handy things
That's always a big
that you
deal.
do.
Yes, sir.
Hey, we hold up class for, yeah. Okay, WC 26. Debussy,
Did you say?
you were saying. Ready.
Okay. Claude Achille Debussy was born in 1862 in Paris to a middle-class family. He went to the Paris Conservatory and studied there for 11 contention-filled years. His years there were stormy because of his marked originality. He did not see why chords had to resolve, and he began to experiment with chromaticism, modal technique, the whole tone, and pentatonic scales, and avoiding a definite key, and using chords that tended to produce vagueness of tonality. A wealthy widow named Madame von Meck noticed him and engaged Debussy to play duets with her children and her. He would travel with the family to their residences in Paris to teach the children music. In Paris, when he was 19, he fell in love with a singer, Blanche Vesnier, and she inspired many of his early compositions. However, his affections did not remain in her. He had several women at a time in his lifetime and caused many of them to consider or attempt suicide. He has been described.
Does that sound like Dalton?
They really consider suicide because I broke up with him. Without me, life is meaningless. I think that's what they're getting
No,
at.
I don't think that was what I was getting at. Go
I don't
ahead.
think so. He has been described by numerous epithets: unsociable, amorous, cat-like, sensual, hedonistic, voluptuous, and rebellious. He was extremely...
I take sensual and voluptuous. I'll take those. You can
I'll take cat.
dang it, I was like someone else.
He was extremely indifferent to the opinions of others. He cared little for people and preferred cats to human beings. A convinced atheist... A convinced atheist, he once said, "I have made religion out of mysterious nature." He was lazy about everything except music. The message of his music was one of humanism disintegrating into fragments and despair. He was the beginning of the 20th century breakup of music. He rejected what was called the straitjacket of tonality. Critics say his music was a determining factor in the music of at least the first third of the 20th century. He wrote no sacred music, and his music never told a story but painted a picture. A lot of his pieces were similar to the Impressionist paintings. Some of them were... in 1912, he wrote images for orchestra, which includes Iberia, and which is one of the most famous interpretations of Spain. And his solo flute piece, Syrinx, also written in 1912. Many features of Debussy's style occur in a very short piece. Here there is sound for sound's sake rather than stress on content, which is what he was pretty big on. He had a superb command of compositional technique, and one of his best-known pieces is Clair de Lune from the Suite Bergamasque. And his glittering preludes for piano pieces are with a perfect sense of portion for small things. Reflections in the Water is a lovely piece written and reminds you of Monet. And like a lot of his pieces were similar. Like they didn't just tell people about stuff. He didn't write sacred music, but he painted pictures and told people, gave people images with his music. He died in March of 1918 and during the bombardment of Paris.
That piece, Clair de Lune, if anybody's ever seen Ocean's 11, 12, or 13, every time they're over a fountain, that song plays. Why would you know that?
Yeah.
That's good, thank you. That is
That's what
good.
it is.
Why did you ask such an idiot question? I mean,
Oh, what are you talking about? That show? Have you ever
He's
seen it?
educated.
It's an
You ever seen
amazing
the show?
show. It's a movie, my bad.
the movie?
Great movie.
Yeah.
Movies.
Yeah.
It was a great movie.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Frazier.
We
Stop being a
I think
suck
that
up,
was-
Dalton.
I think
Suck up just because I know things and you don't?
Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. He preferred cats to human beings. This was
I
one
didn't
screwed
know
up
that.
meeting.
Yeah.
Not because he preferred cats to human beings. I don't quite understand, but coming to class this morning, my wife's not feeling well, so she brought me, so she got to do some stuff while she's not feeling well. Cat was running across the road. I said, hit it. I said, that sorry thing comes around our house and eats our cat food. I know that cat. Kill it. She would kill it. I don't understand that. Should have just run over it.
Yeah.
Well, Debussy was no, he was not. There's some of these guys that in my mind probably rank in a level of rank. You have to appreciate their music, the sound of their music, but it just seemed like it didn't connect with who they were as people. And he's one of several that we've read that I would say his music was a lot better than he was as a person. So,
We have not talked about program music. I've got grout right here. This is referred to in your book. They quote grout in your book. And this is kind of the classic history of Western music that music majors study out of. Anyway, he starts talking about, where did I put it? Starting point for 19th century program music was Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. And then he talks about how the composers in that time really were into that. Program music is music that either depicts a story or it kind of paints a picture in your mind. And these guys were really into that. So when you listen to Debussy, you kind of can visualize something going on. You know, you can picture a scene. Monet, I mean, is very closely related. They were both French. It was both very impressionistic. Debussy is like that. And so program music is an important thing to have in mind. Yes. Paints a picture, tells a story.
okay, good. Well, if you've seen the movie,
Yeah,
that music fits
it does.
those scenes really well, so it's good. He's got Richard Strauss.
Ricardo. Ricardo Strauss.
Love hearing him talk.
Richard Strauss was born in Munich in 1864. He was the most famous of the post-Romantic German composers and was one of the greatest figures of his time. In his youth, he received a thorough musical education from his father. He wrote his first music at the age of 6 and continued to write music almost until his death. Richard Strauss married Pauline de Anna, and she was a great source of inspiration to him. She sang his songs accompanied by him and did much to popularize them. Compared to the work of younger composers, Strauss's harmonic and melodic language was somewhat old-fashioned by this time. Nevertheless, the songs and tone poems have always been popular with audiences and performers. Strauss himself declared in 1947, "I may not be a first-rate composer, but I am a first-class, second-rate composer."
I'm the best loser.
He wrote the comic opera Der Rosenkavalier, which was the creative high point of his career. By the age of 50, he had already become a millionaire, so he was then able to devote himself to art and his music and not worried about finances, unlike almost all other famous composers. When the Nazis came to power in Germany, Strauss was appointed head of the Third Reich of music, but being an opportunist, amoral, and apolitical, he never really cared about what was going on with the Nazis. He only cared about his music and what was best for himself. He was a master of melody and drew a lot of inspiration from his wife. In fact, 2 of his greatest songs, Cecile and Morgan, were written in wedding tribute to her. He was the end of a tradition rather than the beginning of a new one. He had little effect on 20th century music, unlike most other composers who died long before they could enjoy success. He outlived his greatest work. His beautiful work, 4 Last Songs, It is actually considered the death of Romanticism by many. He composed this at Lake Geneva at Montreux. Later in his life, he spent most of his time in Switzerland, but eventually did return to Garmisch in Germany, where he had composed a great deal of beautiful music. And in 1949, he died.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
As you're listening to biographies, try and get a perspective of time. He died in 1949. My mother was born in 1930, so he was alive in my mother's lifetime. Okay. Also, the thing to remember Richard Strauss for is "Thus Spake Zarathustra," which is the theme song from 2001: Space Odyssey. Bum bum bum. Ba-yam! That is Richard Strauss. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. All right. Number 30.
Joplin? Yes, Joplin.
Yes, Scott Joplin.
Okay, Scott Joplin was born in 1868, and he's born in Texarkana, and he taught himself to play piano at age 7.
It's where my mother lives, Texarkana.
Texarkana, that's like legit. It's in Texas, by the way.
It's actually 2 states.
Texarkana.
There's Texas, there's Arkansas.
Right. He taught himself to play piano at 7, and his father deserted the family, so to support the 6 children, his mother worked as a maid, and she would take Scott along with her to go, and he would play the pianos at some of the people's houses that she worked at. And Joplin went through the typical routine that most artistic people experience, where they just people don't really appreciate their music for what it is, and so he played at lots of bars and salons and clubs, and he was a pretty modest person, so he didn't like working at those places at all. And Scott Joplin devoted his life to creating a true art form, and died believing himself a failure in his heroic mission. And his wife said, "You might say he died of disappointment. He wanted to be a real leader, to free his people from poverty, ignorance, and superstition." And he died in 1917.
What year was he born again?
He was born in 1868.
Do y'all know that he was black? He was a black
Yeah.
American, African American.
I was trying to figure out how to put that.
Yes, that is the
Obama would have liked his black.
Just saying. After the Civil War. You guys, he was born right after the Civil War. Okay? And so it was incredible. He was so talented. Has anybody played Joplin rags? You played Joplin? They are hard. I mean, your left hand is like always in octaves, and you're doing things totally different on each hand. They're incredible. They are very cool.
Almost before his time.
He's famous for the entertainer, y'all know the entertainer.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another. Yeah.
But I was listening.
Yeah.
Almost before his time.
I love black.
Well, distinctly American.
Yes.
Everybody else has been pretty much European up until now.
Very distinct.
So there's distinctly that, and really devised a musical style that is distinctly American, and specifically Black American. So brings a lot to the table. Sure does. Good job. Okay, group number 4. It is your time. All right.
Okay. Sergei Rachmaninoff was born into a wealthy landowning aristocratic family in 1873, just outside of St. Petersburg. His grandfather was an amazing pianist, as was his mother, who taught all of her children how to play. But her piano served more than just a teaching purpose. She also used it as like her timeout spot. If you misbehaved, you had to sit underneath the piano. It's all for misbehaving. She would have to sit under the piano. He'd have to sit there for a while.
I never have to sit on the
She also had total and complete control over all 6 of her children because her husband was a reckless living gambler who eventually gambled away all of the family money and the land and the house, which forced them to move to St. Petersburg in 1882. By the time they got settled there, diphtheria came through the city and several of his siblings got sick and one of his sisters died. His father just couldn't handle the fact that, he probably caused this to happen, and so he totally, completely abandoned the family and nobody ever saw him again. After that, Sergei was able to obtain a scholarship to the Petersburg Conservatory of Music, but there he received absolutely no discipline, so he mostly just goofed off and had fun and did whatever he wanted. One of his cousins, Alexander Solovty, began to notice that he was just going to end up like his father if he didn't get a good father figure. And so he introduced him to music professor Nikolai Zverev. Rachmaninoff became his pupil in the autumn of 1885 when he was 12. It just totally cut off his chance of having a lot of fun and doing whatever he wanted. But he settled down and learned how to play the piano and how to compose. His sister Elena eventually moved to Moscow because she'd been accepted to the opera house. And then she died of anemia when she was 17 and never made it there. It really shook him up. She was the one who introduced him to Tchaikovsky's music. He based a lot of his stuff off of Tchaikovsky. He just transcripted a lot of his stuff. His teacher Zverev had lots of parties and just lots of loud music, and there were people everywhere all the time. And when Rachmaninoff began to compose, he said, "Nothing helps me so much as solitude," because there was just too much going on and he couldn't focus. And so he and Zverev had an argument and he left. He wrote a lot of things, the poem of Ecstasy and the poem of Fire. He just increased in knowledge and compositions. He left Zverev in 1889. In 1892, he graduated with honors from the Moscow Conservatory of Music. The committee was unanimous in its decision to award him the highest mark ever, and his old teacher was a member of the committee. They were able to fix their relationship after that. When he was 19, he wrote one of his most famous pieces, Prelude in C sharp minor. As a result, he became widely known all over the world, but he gained very little money from his masterpiece. He wrote 24 preludes for the piano in about 20 years. In 1893, both Tchaikovsky and Zverev died. It was a huge shock to him because they were both really big teachers of his, and it was a huge shock. His first symphony had his premiere performance in Petersburg, but it was a total failure. Later, people thought the conductor was drunk and therefore was played badly, but that didn't really help the fact that his first symphony had failed. He was invited to conduct and play in London in 1898, and then invited back the following season, but he returned to Russia in a worse mental state than he left. He went to see a psychiatrist, and this doctor really, really encouraged him because he said, "You will do this, you will write your concerto, you will get this done." In 1901, he had 3 new works. His second concerto was just a total success. He married a girl named Natalia in 1902, and they visited Vienna, Venice, Lucerne, and Beirut. He completed 11 songs on that trip, including Lilacs, In the Silence of Night, Floods of Spring, and Oh Do Not Grieve. In 1904 and 1905, he became established as one of the most able opera conductors in Russia. In 1906, he moved his family to Dresden, and there in virtual isolation, he wrote his best work, which is his Second Symphony. He also wrote a work based on the painting The Isle of the Dead by Swiss painter Bachmann. In 1909, he made his first American tour as a pianist. It was a huge challenge, but he composed his third piano concerto during that trip. In 1914, the Revolutionary War in Russia had become absolutely overwhelming, but he continued to work on his Vesper Mass, and because he loved the Russian church chants from childhood. And then up to 1917, he was so completely focused on his music, he hardly ever noticed what was going on around him. At his most fearful moment because of the war and revolution, he received an invitation to give a concert tour in Sweden, and he was able to get his 2 daughters, his wife, and himself out of Russia. They went to Finland for a while, and then they moved to America in 1918. He spent the first 30 or so years of his life as a composer, conductor, and pianist. Because he had little solitude for composing, and America had several renowned conductors, he chose to be a pianist. He worked for the next 25 years in the United States giving concerts. He never got to go back to Russia. In 1931, he bought a home in Switzerland and patterned it after his home in Russia. While he was there, he wrote his last composition, Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. He became an American citizen 5 weeks before his death, and he died of cancer at the age of 70.
Okay, very good. I was at a wedding over the weekend and they played Rachmaninoff.
Was it the last one she's talking about?
I think so.
Paganini, that's
I think
real
so.
commonly done.
So
I've done that.
it's a very common sound. Yeah, I just did not know it was associated with it. Is that it?
No, yeah, that's
Oh, no, that's not, I mean, it's something you hear quite often. Again, I didn't know that it was. Okay, chapter 33, Arnold
Okay.
Do you have anything on that?
Just remember Rachmaninoff, remember the Russian guys. He's part of that Russian nationalistic music. Tchaikovsky's at the end of the Romantics. No, we're talking Rachmaninoff. He's at the end of the Romantic period, but that real Russian sound. So kind of in your brain, put together Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Rachmaninoff. It's that big Russian kind of feel to it. And the piano concertos are just incredible, incredible.
Okay.
I'm doing Arnold Schoenberg.
Schoenberg.
He was born in Vienna in 1874, and so he was kind of surrounded by music in his younger life. And he was, like, out of all the ones we read, he was kind of like the only self-taught composer. He only got instruction from a few people during his life. He was also somewhat of a philosopher, and during his lifetime, he became a Roman Catholic for a little bit, and then he turned to Protestantism, and then he turned to the Jewish faith, so it's kind of iffy, like what he really believed. Anyways, he started composing at 8, and that's kind of impressive since he never had really any instruction. And let's see, he was the one who invented the 12-tone method, which is basically 12 notes in a row, and you have to play every single one before you can, like, start over and use, like, if you played A, then you couldn't use A until you used all the others. Anyways, and this kind of reflected on his, like, what he believed in his religion. He was trying to project moods of anxiety and fear, and he aimed to strip music of human emotion and feeling, and he wanted to produce music that was brief, thoroughly objective, and unemotional. He married, and in 1901 he moved to Berlin, and he spent a lot of his time, like, not composing music, but like being a philosopher and trying to figure out what he believed about life. And he studied with, John Cage actually studied with him for a while, and that's kind of who influenced him. And one of his big pieces is think it's an opera. It's called Moses and Mary. That's not it, but, and he said that God was an unknowable being, he was impersonal. And towards the end of his life, he felt that he had ruined music because he had been so like strict with it and not allowed it to be like have emotion. And he's kind of haughty. Also, he said, "Genius learns only from itself." Genius learns only from itself. Talent chiefly learns from others. And he was kind of saying, "I'm a genius," because he didn't learn from anyone. He kind of just taught himself. So anyways.
It's significant that he was not formally trained, because what Schoenberg did, he was the one who opened the door to what, in my mind, is 20th century music. When she talks about the 12-tone patterns, it is within an octave. Within do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, you've got the sharps and flats in between, and if you count them all, there's 12. Okay, so instead of having a major key kind of sound that makes sense in our ear, or a minor key sound that makes sense in our ear, he introduced atonality. A means no tonality. And so you don't have a tonic, you don't have some place that sounds like, ah, it's done. So it's that constant conflict going on within the piece. The atonality came from Schoenberg. What else is going on with him? He was kind of the forerunner in that, because, I mean, that's who John Cage studied with. And so remember, if you don't have a formal background in something, you have just real diverse ideas about what this art form is. And that's what he did. He just created a whole new animal.
Which isn't necessarily good, unless you're a genius, and apparently he had some of that, but he was also reflective. I mean, his music was pretty much reflective of him. I mean, I don't know if you said this, Caroline, but I mean, he made the comment once, "My religion needs no God, only faith." Did you say that up there?
I have it written down. I forgot to.
And what is that? Our religion needs no God, only faith. But that kind of gives you an idea of how dysfunctional he was in his thinking. And why would you have a religion without a God? Just for the sake of having faith in whatever it is that you have faith in.
Faith is healthy, so whatever you have faith in, as long as you have faith, you're a healthy person.
Well, faith is faith. It's faith in faith, not faith in anything or anyone in particular. So, noticed he did study with Gudinski. He was a painter. We looked at some of his stuff. In fact, Schoenberg painted a little bit. So it was kind of all over the page. Interesting character. Okay, next is Charles Ives, 34, Samantha.
Charles Ives was born on October 20th, 1874 in New York. He studied with his father at the age of 5, so music with his father at the age of 5. His father, whom he greatly respected, felt a person could keep his music interests stronger, cleaner, and bigger, and freer if he didn't try to make a living off of it. Some critics believed that Charles Ives' business career was a handicap to him as an artist. No idea what I just said. Some of his music includes A Song for a Harvest Season, General Ruth Enters into Heaven, At the River, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, which is a hymn that a lot of people sing in churches. And the next one's a little gory. There's a Fountain Filled with Blood. He married Harmony Twitchell, the sister of one of his Yale classmates. Harmony was the daughter of a clergyman, and going to church was extremely important to her. They had no children, but adopted one, and her name was Edith. He was an extremely sensitive and shy man, so not too sociable there. He is known as one of the greatest, most original, experimental, and enduring composers in the history of America.
Okay, again, another American. Obviously, not a lot of those that were formative, at least in the 1800s. I don't know if you picked up on what she said, but he became incredibly wealthy. And people were wondering if that wasn't something that got in the way. His music ended up being kind of a part-time, if you will, kind of thing. Which is ironic, because most of these guys who were real good tended to live a life of poverty, if that's what they had to do in order to do their music. So, interesting character.
He was neat. He was really neat. I remember the lecture in my music history class back in college when we had Charles Ives. He was entertaining. Because his dad was a musician too, he really challenged Charles to think outside the box. And so they would do things like sit down and play songs together. One would pick one key, the other would pick another key. Or sometimes they'd play two different songs at the same time and just kind of introduce them to listening to different kinds of things. It was almost a game. Okay, so the piece that probably made the greatest impact on me when I heard it was he's depicting a parade day in little town. And one band is marching one way down the street, the other band is marching the other way. They're both playing entirely different songs in entirely different keys. And you can hear them cross each other in the music. And so it made us giggle. It's like, that was so clever and different. Nobody had ever thought of doing that before. But you would recognize little pieces of songs. I mean, because he used familiar songs, but he would just do funny things with it. And it was like he really listened in life. He would hear people singing out of tune, or he'd hear, instrumentalists making mistakes. Well, he would write that into a song. And so there would be just little funny kind of goofy things going on purpose. It's like, yeah, that's life. That's what really happens out there. And so it was fun. It was fun music.
Cool. He didn't write those hymns.
No.
He incorporated
used
them in his music,
Right.
which is, I don't know if that's what Samantha said or not, but you can hear that
Mm-hmm. You
in
recognize
his music.
stuff.
And there are guys even today that if you listen, you'll pick up on. In fact, I don't know if y'all what y'all listen to. I think it's, and I say this, it's probably pretty much off the wall. But what's the guy's, City on a Hill, what's the name of that?
Sitting on his knees.
City on Its Knees?
Really, Matt?
No, it's another one. It's not him. It's somebody else that, I'm just sitting there drawing a blank. No, it's a song. It's a singular artist. What's his, golly,
Chris Tomlin?
Yes, thank you. Chris Tomlin. What is it?
Yeah,
God of the City.
That's a good
Now,
song.
what you don't realize, thank you, I believe it's that particular one, maybe Toby Max, but I think it's God of the City. What you don't realize when you hear that is a kind of a musical pattern that's very similar to a secular artist that put out a piece probably back in the 80s or 90s that has the same kind of, first time I heard it, I thought, The Thief! He's stealing, and now I'm forgetting that. Phil Collins had a song that, something about the night, all this kind of thing. And I'm thinking, when I heard this Chris Tomlin, I thought, he's stealing the daggone melody. Now he didn't, because once you hear it, there are definitely differences. But it's that kind of thing, so anyway, borrowed the idea. Okay, good. That was Ives, and he was number 34, need 36. Couple of, nothing about the Spanish guy. Andy?
Is it Faya or Fala?
Fire.
Fire? Usually double L's or Y's.
Manuel de Falla was born in Cadiz in 1876. His early teaching in music